joining me in the garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and this is a walk in the garden, and it's filmed by NCTV in Norfolk, Massachusetts, in my garden here in Norfolk. And I'm in my herb garden, and the herbs have grown quite substantially since my last program, which was in May. It's now the end of June, and things have really come up. The rue is in full bloom, and rue is not an edible herb, nor is southernwood. At least they were once probably medicinal. They may still be for some folks, but I do not use my herbs medicinally, only in the culinary sense. And sometimes bunches of these more medicinal herbs or aromatic herbs, in other words, smelly herbs, can be used in outbuildings and drawers to repel mice and insects because they don't like the smell of some of these herbs. One of the things I want to caution you, if you do grow rue, which is this lovely blue-green plant with the yellow blossoms, when you cut it, it has a sap in the stems that can be very irritating to the skin, especially if it's in full sun. So if you're going to cut this back, I suggest either wearing gloves or doing it out of full sun and washing carefully afterwards. You can get a significant skin irritation from it. We have plenty of herbs to use in cooking, and I have a number of mints over here, different kinds of mint, orange mint, strawberry mint, mint julep mint, mojito mint up a little further. And I've been using those. I have chocolate mint over on the other side. They're kind of fun to use. All of them are minty, but they have a little undertone of one of the other flavors. We have plenty of sage. I have a little stevia, which can be used as a sweetener. And we have lemon balm, lime balm, lemon thyme, lime thyme, rosemary, and various other thymes. This is a Rose officinalis. And this is an apothecary rose that was once used in making of perfumes. And I use it sometimes. I can candy the rose petals or just use it as decoration. It's a very fragrant rose. It's almost finished with its bloom. This is a rose that blooms just once. And so after it blooms is the time to cut it back. Any rose that blooms multiple times, you would have cut back earlier in the spring. This one, again, can be cut back after it blooms. I prefer to leave the blooms on this one as they go to make rose hips, which add some color to the fall garden. So I will not deadhead this one. The roses that bloom multiple times, you would cut off any blooms that were spent like that. And I have a few of those as well. Moving over this way, we had sorrel last month, and now it is going to seed, and I'm going to cut that back, and hopefully it'll keep going a little bit. We've had a lot of rain in the last couple of weeks, and that's made everything really green up. And I had a pot with some bay leaf in it, and I was wondering if it was even alive. Some of the stalks were dead. I did cut it back some. I'll probably cut it back a little more, but I am happy to see that I have a lot of new green growth. This is a plant that I'll bring in for the winter, so I just leave it in the pot in the summer and bring it outside. It's time to start picking some of these herbs to be used in drying, and I'm going to come back over here and pick some oregano, and the time to pick it is before it blooms. And some of it is starting to look like it's going to bloom shortly, but we'll pick some of the stalks that aren't. And what I do with my herbs that I want to dry is I bundle them together with a rubber band. The herbs will shrink as they dry. And if you use a ribbon or a piece of string to tie them together, they're likely to fall out. So I use a rubber band. If you want to get fancy and tie your ribbon around that when you hang it up, you can do that. But this will go in the house and I'll hang in a cool, dry spot. Usually that would be my dining room in my case. But you may have another spot where it's rather shady and kind of cool, and you can just hang these until they dry. Then you can strip off the foliage and store it for the winter and use it. Really smells good. Smells like pizza. So oregano's one that I really like to dry. Also thyme. And thyme can be dried either as a bundle or, because it's a shorter plant, I sometimes just dry it on a plate and put the plate again on a sideboard someplace to let it dry. We've got chives that I'll be using today. They're up in this area, and you can use chives all summer. Just keep cutting them, and I usually cut those with the scissors and bring them in. You can also freeze them. They freeze extremely well, so you'll have chives to use in winter dishes too. The lemon balm is a nice lemon herb. I use that sometimes in baking cookies. I also use the mint in baking, as well as just putting it into a glass of iced tea or lemonade. We'll just keep cutting herbs to dry. Sage, again, is another one that I have several different kinds of sage here. This one's a broadleaf sage. This one is more of a standard sage, and that too can be dried for cooking. It dries extremely well. And sage and oregano are two that drying seems to be one of the best ways to preserve them. I have a few other herbs in other parts of my garden. Unfortunately, this tree has gotten a little larger than intended. It was supposed to be a dwarf cherry, but nobody told it, I guess, because it got a little large. And it's shading part of this garden. Some of the herbs do okay in here, but others need more sun. So I have the basils and some lemon balm and lemongrass in my flower and vegetable gardens. I also grow cilantro and dill over there. Those are annual herbs, and I seed those into my vegetable garden, which we'll see a little later. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what's happening over there. As you may have remembered, this spring I had some surgery on my hand, and I didn't get to do a whole lot of pruning. I was not able to prune the grapevine, and it has gone crazy. And we have lots of grapes coming. They'll probably be small because of the numbers, but it has kind of taken over the arbor. Usually I have pruned it down quite a bit, but it'll be interesting to see what it does this year. And I do seem to have a lot of grapes coming, which I'm sure the birds will really enjoy. They usually get most of them. Coming down to this plant, this is a lamb's ear, and I don't particularly like the blossoms on it, so I cut them off. And I don't need it to go to seed because I have plenty, but I just tend to cut off the blossoms at some point. I let a few of them grow, but cut off the majority. As plants grow, this is a salvia, and this stalk has finished blooming. But if you're able to see down to the base of the plant, you'll see that several new blooms are coming. So I'll just take off the old stalk down at the base, and this one as well in the middle. And new blooms should form on it. This is called deadheading, and it means taking off the flower stalk. I have another one down a little ways. And by taking off that flower stalk, you promote it to bloom again. A plant's objective for the year is to bloom, go to seed, and then die. So if you can prevent it from going to seed, it will often keep going and produce new blooms. I had a lot of bulbs in this garden, and you need to wait until they've fully browned up in order to remove them. We're able to start removing them now. Some have been removed. The ones that bloomed later in the season, the daffodils that were late daffodils, are still browning off. So I'll have to leave this for a while. This is going to leave a hole in the garden. And fortunately, I have a few potted plants that can be put in this area once these are gone. Lilies have started to bloom, and you can still look for the lily beetles. I haven't had too much trouble with them this year. Any that I've found I've been able to squash, and so we've kept some lilies going. They seem to be doing much better. Again, a predator that was released in Rhode Island probably almost 8-10 years ago has now kind of covered the area, and there just aren't as many of the lily beetles around. So they affect these earlier lilies, usually worse than the later oriental lilies. But if you see any of the little red beetles, be sure to squash them. You usually don't need a pesticide for them, though they say that neem will work, and that's a safer pesticide. To fill some of the spaces left over from the bulbs, I was able to put in some of the annuals that I took out of my garden. I had planted zinnias and had some cleome come up on its own. Those are annual plants that sometimes reseed. The zinnias do not, but the zinnias needed to be thinned out. And so I have transplanted a few of them into my flower garden. And now I'm using some water and some water-soluble fertilizer on them in order to get them settled in. And they seem to be settled in and starting to grow. This is a foxglove, and last year I had a number of foxgloves that bloomed, and they reseeded. These are baby foxgloves, and they can be divided or not, but they are here and there throughout my garden now because I spread the seeds here and there. And a foxglove is what is called a biennial, and that means it'll grow foliage this year, but I can look forward to hopefully some blooms next year, unless the winter is really terrible, like the last one was with a very cold spell, and then we may not have any. But it's definitely worth a try to reseed them and have them grow throughout the garden. Again, I wasn't able to do a whole lot of pruning, but I'm going to move down this way past some of these lilies. And this is a campanula, and they come in blue and in this pink. They do spread considerably. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them. And after it blooms, I will make sure to cut back the blooms on that one so that it doesn't spread too much further. I have some daylilies here, and they are almost ready to bloom. I have daylilies here and there. Daylilies are a very good plant to plant with daffodils because they cover up the ripening daffodil foliage. There's still some of the daffodil foliage in with the daylily, and that will be pulled out as I can. But they kind of cover the foliage as they come up. This was a Nectoscordum or nectar garlic, and it has a very garlicky scent to it if you cut the stem. It has a very interesting kind of fireworksy bloom, but they have gone by, and now it's time to cut those back too. And so I'll get out here and get those all cut back so that we can see the geranium and the other flowers behind it. This yellow one, and I don't want to step on anything here, is almost gone. This is called phlomis, and it's a little different plant. Maybe if I move around this way, it'll be easier to see. And it's a strange little yellow plant, kind of architectural with its 3 layers. I like it, and it seems to be a little tenderer than some of the others, so I do put some straw on that one in the winter. It looked nice with the blue blooms of the baptisia that was back here, and now the baptisia has finished blooming, and it has these lovely pods. It's kind of in the pea family, and its seeds are in pods, and they are numerous. And if you don't want it all over the place or to spread out any further than it is, get in there and cut off these pods before they turn brown and spread all over the garden. So that's another thing that I will be cutting down. I go through the garden at least once a week, cutting out things that have already bloomed and seeing if anything needs attention. leave these down here and pick up another couple things. This is a fungicide, and we've had such damp, humid weather that some of the plants, particularly peonies, of which I have some over the other side, and phlox, which is right here, can become mildewed. And mildew is a fungus, and this fungicide, which I mix up, can help with that. Now, some people also can use a mixture of milk and water that seems to be helpful too. If you really don't want to use a prepared fungicide, they're usually pretty safe, but milk and water can help. And that would be something I'd use on edible crops. But on the flowers that I'm not going to eat, of course, I will use a prepared mixture of fungicide. Also on peonies, peony foliage can become blackened, and this will help with that. This year we have had an influx of rabbits. Unfortunately, I no longer have a dog, at least not yet, maybe another day. But rabbits have been very busy, and this is dried blood, and they don't like it. And it's also a good fertilizer. So on the asters that they have been nibbling, I will just spread some of the dried blood. It does work pretty well. They don't care for it, so it does help keep them away from something until it grows a little larger. The only problem with dried blood is you have to reapply it after each rain. And when we've been getting rain every day, that means I'm out here quite frequently reapplying this to the plants that they don't like. Eventually they get the idea and move on. But I have a whole collection of baby bunnies now, here and there in the garden. They, along with the chipmunks, which we may see run across at any time, are very numerous this year. We'll move down the garden a little. These are oriental poppies that have already bloomed. And I'm leaving the seed pods on these. I find them decorative later on in the season, in fall and winter arrangements. These will all turn brown, and these don't open up. They seem to be closed. Some of the annual poppies will open up, and I'm able to get seed from them. These do not, but I do save the pods, and I will cut down the pods when they've dried and save them to use in winter decorations. You can also paint them if you want gold or silver ones, and they add a lot to some of the winter arrangements, which we'll be making later. This is butterfly weed, and excuse me, it's a native plant. Right now it's covered with bees, and I'm waiting for the monarchs to find it. It is a pollinator plant, and it's also a favorite of monarch butterflies. This is a type of milkweed, but it doesn't spread as much as just the common pink milkweed, which is also in bloom. I have some of that in a more natural area, but this one is very nice in the garden because it adds this beautiful orange color. Right now it's got a lot of honeybees on it. Someone in the area must have a hive, and they're very busy visiting my butterfly weed. I have a rose here, and this rose is a rebloomer. So once a bloom has gone, I will cut it off and deadhead it, and more blooms should come. Another thing I'll do with this rose is keep it fertilized. I'll be fertilizing this after this first flush of bloom is gone. I'll also watch it for any pests and either pick them off or use a neem, which is a fairly safe pesticide if used as directed. You'll notice some lilies in the back. Again, those are the earlier lilies. The oriental lilies are the taller ones above them, and they will bloom a little later on. This is a plant that's done extremely well this year. It's Maltese cross, or Lychnis, and I've usually had heads about like this, but this year it's formed some fairly large and showy heads. It evidently likes the high humidity and the rain that we've been having. Again, more butterfly weed and an aster. One of the other things that I haven't gotten done this year is staking up plants or putting in plant supports. And you'll notice this aster has spread all over the place. I need to make a note for next year to support the plant. I did add a delphinium, that's the tall blue spike in back, and I have some other blue verbena, Veronica in front of it, and also the some of the other plants have done very well in there. This one is coming at Sedum Autumn Joy, and it's starting to form its blossoms. Again, it's gotten quite tall. Another rose in the back, a climber, is also a rebloomer, and again, I will go in and deadhead that one, give it another dose of fertilizer, and see if we can get some further blooms. More foliage to be pulled out as it goes. And I'm surprised we haven't been bothered by the wren in the wren house. Again, as the foliage comes out, I've added more flowers along the way. This is a hummingbird feeder, and I make up a solution of half a cup of sugar and 2 cups of water. I boil it. Some people just mix it. I boil it and cool it and then use it to fill my hummingbird feeder, and I've had quite a few visitors this year. Now they're kind of going to the plants rather than the feeder. Early in the season they used the feeder quite a bit, but I'm still getting quite a few hummingbirds, on sunny days particularly. More plants are coming. Lavender, I had a newer variety which did not do well this winter. Last winter was a strange winter here. We had a very warm winter up until February, when we had jarring cold. It got down to well below zero for just a few days. And some of the plants, I think, had started to grow before that happened and were hurt quite badly. And some of the lavenders had some significant die out. This is an older lavender, and it stood it pretty well without much dieback. We still have daylilies, phlox, and daisies to come. Most of the peonies are gone. They were over this way. There's a white one that's left a little bit, and again, once they're finished, we take off the blossoms. This plant is lady's mantle, and its leaves are particularly nice when wet. The water kind of beads up on them and looks nice. And the blooms are very nice added to flower arrangements and just add a little texture to the garden. I'm going to move up this way, and these are perennial geraniums. And again, I did not get any dividing done, and this one has really taken off. I have eryngium plants behind it. These are smaller eryngium, and over in the back corner I have a larger eryngium, which we'll get to in a minute. But these have really spread out over the lawn, and they need to be cut back later on, and next year I need to make sure I divide them. It's good to make notes along the way. The other thing that you might want to do now is order your bulbs for fall. You're not thinking about fall right now, or particularly next spring, but most of the bulb companies that have mail order bulbs are now having a sale until July 1st. So if you want to order bulbs, you can get 10 or 15% off by ordering early. So plan where you might want to put bulbs next year based on the pictures you took this spring, and you can order the bulbs now, and they will be sent to you at the proper time for planting this fall. I'll move up this way, and we have another daylily. This one is Happy Returns, and it is a happy plant, a nice bright yellow. And behind it I have some nepeta, which is blue, and it kind of goes with the yellow. And behind that is the eryngium that I spoke of, which is the large blue brackets on it. Again, a favorite of the bees. And this little tall plant is Verbena bonariensis. And I planted some one year, and now I have it coming up here and there throughout the garden. And it is a taller plant, and again, the butterflies love it. And I'm surprised we don't see one on some of it right now. That pretty much does it for the perennial garden. Again, I keep monitoring it, making sure that I'm pulling out all the old bulb foliage as it turns brown. Perhaps transplanting a few annuals into it at this point, and generally just enjoying the blooms. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden and see what's happening over there. Things are growing well in the vegetable garden, and we're starting to do some picking and enjoying some of the vegetables. And one of the things I'm going to have been enjoying the last week are snow peas. These are the Chinese peas that you find in the stir fries, and they grow easily here and quickly. Once they start, they are prolific. They don't last a long time in the garden. All the peas will be finished eventually, but right now I'm able to come out and pick every other day, enough for a meal. And it takes a little skill to pick snow peas because they hide. And you can see they're the same color green as the leaves. And I find it helps sometimes to shake the plant a little bit, and then you can see them and pick them. And not only will we be enjoying these over the next few weeks in stir fries and hors d'oeuvres and just even raw, they're quite good. But they do freeze well. I will be very briefly blanching them in the microwave in a little water, and maybe cook them for about a minute, and then put them in cold water, then dry them well and put them in the freezer, and then we can have snow peas in our stir fries all winter. Again, I picked them day before yesterday, and today I have a whole handful again, at least. Moving down here, we have garlic scapes. Most of them have been picked, and I noticed I missed a few. And these need to be cut off your garlic plants in order to get the garlic that you want, which is under the ground. But don't throw them away. They're useful. You can make hummus with them. You can make garlic scape pesto. They have a milder garlic flavor. And they can also be grilled or cut up and used in stir fry as a mild garlic flavor. Most of them have already been harvested. But it is important to take them off the plants at this time. In addition to the snow peas that are at this area, if I move down a little bit, I have what are called snap peas. And snap peas are pea pods that are filled with peas, but you eat the pod as well. I grow 3 kinds of peas. These are the second one. The first one you eat just the pod. These you eat the pod and the peas. And the last one, which is not ready yet, are the shell peas. And those you shell from the pod. Those are like the frozen peas you buy in the store, only they're much better fresh. They take a little more work to prepare. But again, these, with the rains that we've been having and the cooler temperatures, peas have done really well this year. And I'm able to pick, again, a lot of these. And again, sometimes shaking the plant, you'll see some that you would have normally missed. But again, you have to get out and pick them because they go fairly fast. And you want to make sure that you get them before they get so big and stringy that you don't want to eat them. I have down here Swiss chard, and I have lettuce, lots of lettuce. We're picking scallions right now. I planted these from sets, and I go through and pick the biggest ones, and if I leave any, they'll turn into actual onions that I can pick this fall if we don't eat all of them as scallions. But these can be brought in and cleaned and used. The beans are ready to go into blossom, so in a few weeks we'll have beans. Everything seems to be growing pretty well. I have a few flowers mixed in and also a few herbs. The basil has not matured yet, and the parsley from last year, we have some that's gone to seed. I'm still able to use some of the parsley that's going to seed or gone to seed, and new parsley is growing, but it isn't quite ready to use yet. Again, most of the garlic that I harvested last year has been used, or else it is dried up to the point where you don't want to use it, but I did freeze some of the cloves so that I have garlic to use until this can be dug. That'll be about another month. Once the lower leaves, maybe 3 or 4 leaves, turn brown, it's time to dig the garlic. You can dig a couple and check it out. You want to make sure that it has large cloves in a firm ball that hasn't started to split. If you leave it too long, it starts to split and it won't last as long in harvest. One of the things I need to do is support this cucumber. And I have cucumbers that are growing here, and I have a little trellis for them that I've made, a little tripod. And basically it's just string that I put around the bottom, and then I'm going to weave string under and up. And around my posts. I've got 2 kinds of cucumbers planted. This one is a slicer, and the other ones are a pickling cucumber. They did not germinate quite as well as these did, so I may not have as many of them. But as these grow, I will help them find the strings to climb on. And this saves a lot of space in the garden because cucumbers can run maybe 6 or 7 feet at least in the garden. You'll notice I've put straw around as a mulch. It helps keep in the moisture, and it also helps keep the weeds down. You still have to weed, unfortunately, but it does help a great deal. And then at the end of the season, it can be plowed in. And now that I've got this on, I'll just tie it. At the end of the season, I'll cut the strings, and plants and all can be put into the trash. But as the cucumbers grow, we'll help them climb up the strings. Tomatoes have been caged. I have a stake in each one, and each tomato needs to be tied to the stake. I'm a little late on that this year, and I haven't done it. I just noticed one of the white butterflies. I'm surprised it isn't over here. The little white butterflies that you see around are called cabbage moths, and there's one flying around, but it's not right here right now. However, they do lay their eggs on your cabbages. Then these are miniature cabbages, which we like, and I also have some broccoli, and also on kale. And that results in green worms, little green caterpillars on your crops, which nobody really likes on their plate. So I do use a product, an insecticide. This is a spinosad, which is relatively safe one, and I will use it in the evening. This is because it is somewhat toxic to bees and other pollinators, and you want to wait until they have gone away for the night before you use something like this. It can also be used on cucumbers if you have cucumber beetles, and on beans if you have a bean beetle problem. But again, follow the directions, especially where it involves the pollinators. We want the pollinators in the garden to pollinate our plants. We don't want to kill them, but some of the things you don't want, you need to use a little spray occasionally. Most of my plants are fine without anything, but I do watch the cabbage plants. And when I start to see holes, I know it's time to spray. Now, let's head back to the shade garden. Shade garden's the place to be on these hot days if it's sunny, because down here it's nice and cool and refreshing. There are some things to do. This year we've had a groundswell of chipmunks, and they've been digging up my crocuses. Now, I used to worry about that, and I was afraid that they were going to just completely take all the crocuses out of this area, of which there are many, and that I would never have any crocuses. But then I realized not only do they dig them up and take them, though they leave little holes, and there are little holes all over here that I've been filling, but they bury them someplace else. So they do come up eventually, but they may come up in a different spot than where you planted them or where they've spread. The ones that I have in here, the crocuses, pretty much fill the area in the spring, and they spread very easily. So I don't worry too much about the chipmunks anymore. And once they're finished, I do fill the holes, and we go on from there. I've put a few annual plants in to cover areas that did have crocuses, and these are the hellebores that bloomed for a long time this spring, and now it's time to cut off the blooms. And most of these have already gone to seed, unfortunately, because they're coming up. They've spread considerably. I do like them, however, and they're easy to pull out if you have small ones that you don't want. This plant is quite toxic, and I don't add it to my compost. I put it into an area in the back of the yard where we just kind of put plants that are cuttings and just let them compost naturally. And we don't use that compost on anything. Plenty of ferns in this garden, along with the hellebores, which stay nice and green all summer. They're almost four-season plant. They tend to stay green all winter, have the blooms starting early in February or March, and then after the blooms they just provide nice foliage for the rest of the season. It fills in along with the ferns and the hostas and other foliage. Now let's move down by the pond. My little water feature isn't big, but I really enjoy it, and I've got half a dozen fish that I've had for a number of years. And we feed them several times a day when the weather is warm. Fish are, they kind of move with the environment. Their metabolism increases in the summer when the water is warmer and slows to a halt in the winter when it's cold. But they do stay in the pond all winter. I have a few water plants, and I have a filtration system. And I do wash the filter periodically, the skimmer filter, because I do get a lot of things falling from the trees. The ideal location for a pond is in a sunnier location without trees overhead. But we wanted a pond here, so we have to deal with things falling, and hence I put in a skimmer system that skims the water that goes up through the waterfall later with the pump that sits in the pond. I learned a lot with building this one. Probably would do it differently another time. I'm still using deer spray here and there, especially on hosta, because the deer do like them. And we haven't had much of a problem with deer. We haven't seen as many this year, undoubtedly due to a lot of building in the area. Their habitat has been taken away. But I have seen slugs, and slugs are those little creepy crawlies that also love hosta and other plants. So I have what's called slug magic or sluggo, and I just put that around. You can see I have some holes in this hosta already, and the holes in the hosta are almost always caused by slugs. They'll also get into the planters, and they like coleus, and they also like impatiens. So we keep a few of the crystals of sluggo on that. They eat that, and then they do not survive. They do like it, and I use this around all of my hostas, especially when they're first coming up in the spring. Once they get to a decent size, they generally are not bothered by the slugs quite as much. Unless it's really dry, and then the slugs go after them for the moisture, I believe. Again, I enjoy this little pond, and enjoy sitting out here and reading a book. It's a pleasant place to be on a warm day, and enjoy some of the plantings. I have astilbe and ferns in addition to some hosta, and this is a bernera and a blue oatgrass. And they are both plants that like it in the shade. The mountain laurel has come out of bloom, and I can deadhead it or not. I probably will at some point take off the blooms so that it doesn't go to seed. And a large rhododendron behind that. This mountain laurel was hit by a tree that fell, and I did not think it was going to survive. It has survived. It's spread out considerably because it rooted as it spread. Rather than being tall, it kind of spread out because it was squashed by the tree. But it is blooming, and we had a lovely bloom on it. They were a pink and white bloom that's gone now. It's already passed. And good new growth for next year. Now let's go inside and see what we can cook up with some of the things we picked in the garden. Today we're going to make some things using herbs. I love using fresh herbs from my garden, and today I'm going to make a meal for a hot summer night, or at least get it started. And I'm going to make some corn muffins, and I'm going to add some chives and cheddar cheese to the muffins to give them a little summer twist. I'm starting out with 1.5 cups of flour. I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of cornmeal, 1/2 cup of sugar, and then we need some baking powder, 5 teaspoons. And 5 teaspoons, or 4 teaspoons, I'm sorry, 4 teaspoons, happens to be 1 tablespoon, which is 3 teaspoons, and 1 teaspoon. So that gives a total of 4 teaspoons. And a teaspoon of salt. And I'll stir these dry ingredients together. This is called the muffin method. There are certain methods to cooking, and this is the muffin method, where you mix all your dry ingredients, and then we're going to mix the wet ingredients, which will be 1 cup of milk, and 2 eggs, put that over here, and 3 tablespoons of salad oil or oil. This is canola oil. Corn oil would work. Olive oil has more flavor, but that I didn't particularly want. A neutral oil is what I wanted for this one. And I'm going to mix these ingredients with a fork, just to make sure they're well mixed. And then I will add that to the dry ingredients and stir that just to dampen the dry ingredients. If you overmix muffins, they have peaked tops, kind of cone-shaped. They are tough, and they have big tunnels in them, and that is not a desirable muffin. So there are a few lumps left. I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of chopped chives from the garden. Let's get them all out. And about 3/4 of a cup of shredded cheddar cheese. I'm going to just lightly stir that in. And then I'm going to fill my greased muffin cups, quite full. These are going to go into the oven for about 15 minutes at 400 degrees. Muffins are quick and easy to make, and most people like them, so they're a quick and easy addition to a meal. And while they cook, I'm going to make some hors d'oeuvres with the snow peas that we have picked, or that I've been picking. And I did cook these slightly in the microwave in a little bit of water because they are large and they tend to get a little tough as they get larger. In my pastry bag, I have a mixture of cream cheese, 1 package of cream cheese, a large package, a 1/4 cup of heavy cream, and 2 tablespoons each chopped chives, chopped parsley, and chopped dill. And I mixed that together. This is a great spread for crackers, for bread, just about anything. I make it when I have these herbs available. And one of the things I can do with it is put it into a pastry bag and use it to stuff some snow peas for an hors d'oeuvre. And it makes just kind of an interesting hors d'oeuvre. The other hors d'oeuvre I'm going to make involves radishes. I've already picked my spinach and radishes that I planted earlier. I have other radishes that I've planted. You can keep planting radishes all summer if you like them, and using them all summer. They grow very quickly. In about 20 days, you'll have new radishes. This year, the weather has been, as I said, plenty of rain, and so we've had the radishes stay fairly sweet as they got larger, and they will continue to get quite large. Right now I'm using dark rye bread, and I'm spreading it with just butter, plain unsalted butter. It's been softened a little bit. And this is a simple hors d'oeuvre. I served this at one of the events at the library recently, and people were so surprised how good it was and how simple it was. Just rye bread and butter, and now we're going to put radishes on top of these pieces. And put them on the plate. And I've sliced the radishes very thin. But the thing that really makes this good is the last thing, and that's the sea salt, the large flake sea salt. And I'm going to just sprinkle some of that on each one. This brings out the sweetness in the radishes like you wouldn't believe. Also a little moisture, so probably shouldn't make them until shortly before you consume them. Need a little more of that. But they make a fine little hors d'oeuvre. And again, just a sprinkling of the little sea salt. This is a Maldon sea salt. Really makes the difference. So I'm going to set that over here. And then we'll work on a main dish salad. And this is using the spinach and some of the lettuce from the garden. And I've got about 6 cups of greens. I'm not going to finish this salad completely, simply because we're not going to eat it right away. And this is one that you have to complete all the steps at the last minute. It's also quick to fix at the last minute. But I'm going to start with about 6 cups of greens, mostly spinach that I had harvested. And I've drained and rinsed 1 can of chickpeas. And I'm going to marinate those for a while. And I need to get out my dry mustard. And I have 1/3 cup of olive oil. I'm going to move that over so you can see. And to that I'm going to add 1/2 cup or 1/2 teaspoon of dry mustard. And 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And about 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. You can use garlic salt, but I have garlic powder. And the powder works a little better than chopped garlic in this particular recipe. And then I want to add some vinegar, and white wine vinegar, or this is a white balsamic vinegar, 3 tablespoons. We'll mix that in. This is the dressing for the salad and the marinade for the peas, all in one. And I'm going to just stir that around. And then this will go in the refrigerator for at least half an hour before we combine the ingredients. And we're going to combine that with the salad greens and one further ingredient, which I'm going to put in foil and heat in the oven. And that is 1/4 pound of salami, sliced salami from the deli. It sounds like a strange combination, but it's quite delicious. And it really goes well on a warm night to have the cool greens and beans and the hot salami. So I'm just going to put this in a foil packet, and we'll put this in a 350-degree oven for about 15 minutes. And then mix the hot salami, the beans, and the lettuce. And that's the main dish salad. And it is one that we have enjoyed many times on summer evenings. Then we need some dessert. And I've made some chocolate chip cookies. And I've added to the chocolate chip cookies, cookie dough, 1/2 to a cup of chopped mint. I've used dark chocolate chips in these, and I've added the 1/2 to a cup. I think I added a little over a 1/2 cup of very finely chopped dried mint to this recipe. I mixed 1/2 of the mint with the sugar in my food processor before I mixed the sugar and butter together in the recipe, and then I added the mint later. However, if you're using pre-made dough, you could just add mint to the dough and then bake them according to the directions. Put these out and we'll wait for our muffins to be finished. Our muffins are out of the oven, and what I'm going to do is go around each one. And when you take muffins out of the oven, It's good to tip them up in the pan. I'll tip up a few of them, and this will help them not be soggy. And usually I can just do this after they've cooled about a minute, which they haven't yet. But just tip them up as they cool, or you can put them on a cooling rack. But usually they just tip right up. If you've greased your pan well, they are hot. But by tipping them up, then they won't be soggy as you let them cool. So we have our muffins, and I'm going to move them down a little bit. And talk a little bit about mint. And this is mint that I picked outside. This is a spearmint. And one of the ways to keep mint, rather than putting it in the refrigerator, is to just put it in a small glass of water. And it will stay fresh for quite a while in your kitchen, and it smells good and looks nice too. So thank you for joining me today. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable, here in Norfolk, Massachusetts.